So you just kind of take it as it is. I don't like it. I'll say this as an alum, not as a journalist. I hate the Blue Bloods. I don't like the Dukes, the Carolinas, the UCLAs, the Kansas, the Indianas. Can't stand any of them. I'm more for the UNLVs, the Rutgers, the Cincinnatis, the St. John's, the DePaul, schools like that. That's who I kind of ride with. And unfortunately, our Rebels really haven't been in the tournament since our guy Dave Rice was coaching back in 2013. So it's real. Long answer to your short question, but I don't like how that went down. And yet they're doing it right in front of us, and they don't care.
They don't care because they've been able to do it for years. And there's a couple things here that I will tie to you, and the fact that you went to UNLV and you remember this stuff. One, Tark has forever been spoken of as some cheater, and I always correct people like, no, Tark was doing what Tark had to do to compete with the cheaters.
Right.
Like you had to do that. So he wasn't the dirty one. And then the other one is this telling of the story back then, especially of, Duke, the gritty, gutty, lovable squad, the good guys against the bad guys, UNLV. The bad guys were Duke.
I agree. And that's we always have that's why when you have what's the word I'm looking here for, guys? When you have the ability to look back and the luxury of looking back and kind of seeing history as it really was. But I'm never going to sit here and say that UNLV and Tark and all those guys were quote unquote clean. But I will sit here and I'll die on that hill along with Willie. I'm sure that they weren't any more dirty than what Duke and Carolina and UCLA. UCLA was probably one of the most filthiest programs you could ever imagine with the booster they had there in San Gilbert.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah,
and Midnight Loot.
Yeah,
Midnight Loot was stealing recruits. So it's fun to sit back and the way I always phrased it was to kind of a perverse pride in being a rebel. And there's a lot of, and I know we'll talk about the Raiders at some point here, guys, but Willie and I talk about this all the time. There is a very strong connection between the Rebels and the Raiders. And now that they're both in the same city, it's interesting. For example, since 1992, Tark's last year as coach at UNLV, the Rebels are now looking for their 17th head coach. The Raiders, Pete Carroll is coach number 18 in that same time frame. And yes, I am counting Chris Beard. He did put the hat on and he did a photo op, and so I'll count him in there as number 17. But yeah, it's nuts how there's so many connections here.
With that being said, you brought it up. UNLV is now in a coaching search. Everybody's got a laundry list of coaches, including Steve. Steve's probably the most legitimate that I've heard and seen. I only have one name on the list, and it's not a matter of that I think anything or heard anything, but I would love to see them take a shot at it since he's been retired for he's been out and doing TV for a couple of years, but he's got such strong ties to Las Vegas, including some of the most powerful money and ties to basketball in Las Vegas, is why not make a run? If you're Eric Harper, and you put all the money out there and you brought in Odom, you brought in Mullen, and you've got people chomping at the bit, and you've got someone who's got ties to some of the biggest casino money, why not take a run at Jay Wright?
I'm with you. I actually contemplated doing this yesterday when I was watching the selection show. Seth Davis sitting right next to Jay Wright on the selection show.
Yeah.
Seth and I are pretty good friends, and I worked with him at Sports Illustrated back in the day, and we've been talking the past month or so. And I was just close to texting, going, "Hey, man, did you ask Jay Wright if he'd come back to UNLV?" Because he was on Rolly's staff.
That's right.
There when Rolly was there for the disastrous run in the sun. Rolly's disastrous run in the sun. But yeah, he's been out of the game for a minute, but you just wonder if there's still something there and there's some juice there and there's something that would get people excited again, whether that's Jay Wright, whether that's Will Wade, whether that's, I look at the Tarkanians Facebook pages. Danny is all about Reggie Theus, that again, which I think they may have missed the boat on that a decade or so ago, but that's interesting. George Tarkanian's all about Stacey Ogden. There's something that's unique about the UNLV job, guys, that has really been missing ever since they did Dave Rice dirty by firing him in the middle of the season. He did start 0-3 by combined 6 points in conference play that year. But he knew if he wasn't getting to the tournament the year he was done, very much similar to what happened to Kevin this year. The difference between the two situations, Dave was kind of like born into it, in terms of being the royalty, being on the national championship team, whereas Kevin did. And again, as an alum, thank you for that Sweet 16 run. But if they didn't find that loophole, he never would have come. And Lon might have been gone a year earlier anyway, because they weren't really doing much at that point. So it's just really, there's something that needs to reinvigorate this fan base, because what's changed in the past 10, 12 years is UNLV men's basketball, the Running Rebels. They're no longer at the top of the pecking order. They're down as far as 4th or 5th in the sports consciousness of Las Vegas, with the Raiders, the Golden Knights, UFC, the Aces, what have you. But, whatever big event comes to town. So we got to get it going, and getting. I heard you guys talking about earlier. It's not about deserve. I agree with you, Steve. It wasn't that he deserved to get fired, but there just wasn't that community outreach, and that's what I've been told by people in the building there at the Thomas and Mack, that he just wasn't into the outreach. And if you're not going to win games and get to the tournament, you've got to at least engender some goodwill in the community. And when you're not doing that, and you're kind of like shutting the door on all the alum that didn't want to come back and be a part of it, that's just a recipe for disaster, especially when you're not bringing in money and you can go basically to your game at the TNN and sit wherever you want because there's nobody there.
There's a lot of jobs where they look at the coach and they're like, hey, we got to do a better job of drawing fans out here. This job situation is especially complicated, though, for one of the reasons you mentioned earlier, that the city has been overrun by Major League Sports. The lead team in the first place set a standard that no one can reach in VGK by making a Stanley Cup final and then winning in 6 years. So how important, well, I'll put it this way. If they hire a young coach who doesn't have a name and no sizzle, or they hire a guy who's got sizzle, like I mentioned earlier, Bob Huggins, right? But Bob's, he's 71. I don't think Bob's going to be out there doing speeches and rallies. Can you consider either end of that spectrum? Or in the case of Bob Huggins, like, hey, if they win, they will come. I'm not even sure they will.
You got to, yeah, exactly. You can't just win either. You got to get to the tournament, and you got to connect with the community. I go back to Desiree when she claimed on her way, and Kevin was kind of her parting gift. I don't even know if you want to use that right word, but on her way out of town, she saddled UNLV with Kevin, and that's not taking a shot at Kevin, but it is what it is. It's kind of like, really, Kevin Kruger, this is a teaching hospital now, the UNLV job. I mean, learning on the spot, and if you go from that to doing it again, all you're really doing is upsetting the old school, long time fans that would support the program. Granted, Gucci Rose gone. All those people that were supporting it back in the day, they're either retired or no longer with us. So you got to get some sort of sizzle. And that's what Desiree said when she hired Otzelberger, was that whoever she was going to hire was going to stand out in a room with John Gruden, who was then the Raiders coach. And at that point, it's like, oh, great, she's getting Rick Pitino? Because who else was going to stand out in a room with John Gruden at that time? And instead it was Otzelberger, who never wanted to be there in the first place, and he bounced the first opportunity he got. So you got to get somebody that connects with the fans, the old school fan base, connects with the history, the tradition, wins, but also generates some sort of electricity and excitement. And that list, guys, is very, very short. They got to nail this one. They really do, because UNLV basketball, like I said, there's something different about it in that town, and you got to get it going before the people that remember that are long gone.
Well, here's the cool thing, and again, I'm making assumptions. I believe when Odom was hired by Harper, that Harper basically used a list of issues with Arroyo and then rolled him in front of candidates like Odom. And then Odom, you could tell Odom like followed it to a T to remedy some of the stuff that Arroyo was weak at. I wonder how these interviews go. I would think it's really important to have someone in there who's got a BS-ometer, you know what I mean? Like a bull crap meter. Because I get the feeling that Otzelberger, when he did the interview, was like, oh yeah, I'm going to get out there and rally the troops. And you're like, then once you met him, you're like, this guy's just going to coach basketball and be a lunatic, but, and kind of keep to himself. Like, he's not a rah-rah guy. So finding that balance in the interview, I wonder what these interviews are like when you tell someone like, hey, I'm sorry, but we need someone to be really fired up. Like, this is part of the job now. You got to get the fans back.
Well, and you got to wonder, is that actually high on the list for Harper too? I mean, does he realize that needs to be on top of the list, or does he? Does he not think that that's the top of the list? As an alum, as somebody that was there, not as long as Willie, obviously, to see it all happening firsthand, but to be there at the tail end of it, it's something that people just don't understand. I saw that Wink was on TV over the weekend talking about exactly that. And Wink didn't play for that, but he actually acknowledged that, hey, we were trying to play. We were trying to measure ourselves up to the Tarkanian team. So the fact that he said that when he was playing, and then he actually acknowledges that today, good for him. I'm sure he's also still trying to get his jersey retired, which it should be. But it's an interesting situation, and it's sad if you're a fan of and respectful towards Kevin, which everybody should be. But at the same time, it's pretty exciting to think that you actually have an opportunity to do this and get it right, as long as you have everything lined up just so. But again, what can they afford? What can they not? Now, there's been a lot of bad press over the past couple of years, but the past couple of days. But they've got an opportunity here to really kind of make it right. And if we were 10 years in the past, Reggie Theus would be a no-brainer for me, because I saw firsthand. I did a story in Sacramento Bee to see what he did at New Mexico State. Now, everywhere he goes, there's something that kind of follows him. But that's what kind of being a Rebel is. And with NIL now, people kind of look the other way anymore.
Well, I'm going to throw one more name at you. I threw it out last week. Steve didn't like it only because of what he's doing this year. I think he took the job somewhat out of spite, but also to get back into the coaching ranks because he really wanted to go to San Francisco a few years ago when he was trying to come here, and it got shot down by a selection committee because Robert Smith had told me that his name had popped up and they shut it down. That was Tina Kunza Murphy. But Steve Lavin, who went to San Diego, didn't do that good of a job. I admit that in the West Coast Conference, but that's a tough program to turn around and come in and do. But he still has a decent enough resume, St. John's, UCLA, and he's a guy that sort of fits the Vegas vibe, if you will. Same way that the Patinos and the Jay Wrights with the suits and the look and the old school Vegas. He understands it and appreciates it. Is he worth giving a stab? Because if you can't afford Jay Wright, I think you might be able to afford Lavin.
And Lavin will be more than interested because he's been interested throughout the years.
That's right.
You're absolutely right. Without giving away any sources. I've spoken to him too. He was more than interested. He couldn't figure out, who do I need to speak to there? Nobody would return his call at the time. And I'm like, look, if you don't like his X's and O's and you thought that he was just a recruiter or the bag man at UCLA and he just rolled the balls out and let the guys play, okay, but he was getting to the Sweet 16 every single year. There's just something about Lav that just literally does fit with Vegas as well. So they could do much worse than at least talk to him. Talk to Steve Lavin. See what his vision might potentially be. And that's the thing. Is if you're going to go old school, Jay Wright, Steve Lavin, Reggie Theus, or the new school, Will Wade is probably the guy that checks all those boxes as well, especially kind of having the checkered past, which, if you think about it, I don't know if there's anybody that personifies kind of modern basketball than him right now, having to go back down to the quote-unquote minor leagues to rebuild his legacy after what happened with LSU. But again, the guy was getting to the tournament, and in 2 years, the Rebels are going to be in that reimagined Mountain West anyways. So again, real interesting and real important time for the future of this program, the future of the university, really, to get things going again. And to quote one of my favorite old-time shows, guys, quantum leap to make right what once went wrong.
Paul Gutierrez, last one. We're going to run out of time here before Raiders talk. Did you want to ask about let's save it for next week. We're going to ask about the 80s, 90s music. But Paul, we're up against it. We appreciate the time. Make sure you follow Paul up on Twitter. We'll see you, buddy.
Sounds good, guys. Thanks. And look forward to doing this every week. Talk to you then.
I'm just booking him every week now. He's like, you're committed.
Yeah.
You know what, Paul? We'll call you tomorrow.
Screw him.
It's one of my favorite movies of the Lebitard show. They used to pull that on guests. Yeah, we'll talk to you tomorrow. And they're like, the guests like, what? Am I booked? I'm like, what the hell's going on here? 364-1100, 364-1100. We got big time boxing in town at the MUA McUltra Arena. Got the 154 World Championship title on the line. Fundora and Booker this Saturday at McUltra Arena, AXS.com. We've got 2 tickets right now, though. 364-1100, caller 7.
Let your voice be heard by texting the